Thank you, Nigel. So we're going to ask our second honoured keynote speaker, Mr. Peter Kazacos, to come up and speak. Peter is the Executive Chairman of Intel, and he has over 35 years' experience in the IT and communications industries. In 1988, Peter founded Kaz and was instrumental in its growth, including its listing on the ASX in 2000 with a value of 60 million and eventual sale to Telstra with a value of 333 million. At the time, Telstra acquired Kaz. It had revenues in excess of 350 million. And Peter was the recipient of the inaugural Australian Entrepreneur of the Year 2001 award in the Technology, Communications, E-commerce and Biotechnology category, and was also inducted into the Hall of Fame for the third annual IT and T Awards in 2004 and the ARN Hall of Fame in 2007. He was the 2008 winner of the CSIRO Tony Benson I Award for Lifetime Achievement. So if you're ready, Peter.
Thank you. I've got my iPad instead today. I'm going to take a little bit of a different spin on it, but a lot of the messages that were brought up earlier are very common. I'll give you a little bit of my background. I've graduated as an electrical engineer, never practiced electrical engineering, but it taught me how to solve problems. I also have a mathematics degree as well. In the early days, I spent time in the IT industry learning how it was run. And then during that time, I also had a passion for building things, creating products. And I suppose what I'll go through is some of the lessons I've learned through my career, including the Kaz years and also some of the time I spent inside Telstra, because you don't get much of an opportunity to live inside a large Australian organisation. Let's just get rid of the sound on this, problem. There we go. The early years when I was at university, towards the end of that, the time of the Apple was coming into ascent, I had one of the first Apple II computers, and with a group of people we started the coaching college, and we built software for the Apple II computer. In fact, we created an authoring package for the Apple II computer that we thought that we could sell to schools. And in fact, we packaged it, produced a manual. In fact, just to give you a bit of a timeline, in those days, printers were dot matrix, and we had one of the first word processors that came out of Australia, but unfortunately it was all uppercase. So I had to actually make the changes to make it upper and lowercase, so the manual came out nice and printed. But the unfortunate thing is I didn't sell many of the products. And the reason for that was that there weren't many computers in schools. So one of the first lessons that I learned is you've got to be, whatever you invent and create, you've got to make sure there actually is a market for it. And you don't fool yourself into thinking that you're a market. There's a wider market for it. So I think it's important. I learned that in the early days. The other thing in those days, there wasn't much capital around. So in the time as I was building my expertise in running IT businesses, opportunities came to me, but I didn't have the capital to actually start that. But at one stage, during the time I was in the company called Aspect Computing, I actually built a superannuation system. And that was one of the things that in those days was the days before compulsory superannuation. It was a system built for a industry player. And I didn't realise how important that was as a turning point in creating my business. There was a time where AMP was in the superannuation space as a player and knew that the industry superannuation space was going to happen. This is compulsory superannuation. A tender came out to build a system for them. I left my employer and bid for that business. Now, again, I wasn't a known brand in that space, but the thing that I had done that I didn't realise is that there were not many people at those days that actually understood superannuation and had built systems. So by having those skills and the fact that I also had done, which I forgot to mention, is that I also wrote a language while I was at the employer aspect, and I knew that I could actually build systems quickly. So they had a requirement that they wanted the system built in 9 months. So that the requirement for 9 months, they needed the domain expertise. Their own department was saying it was going to take 3 years. And the organisation took the risk with me to actually be able to create that. So that was the start of CAS, 1988. It was an Olympic year, which is quite interesting today. This is an Olympic year as well. And it's actually ironic as you go through the things that CAS was listed in Olympic year 2000. And we sold in an Olympic year 2004. So it's interesting. So the system was built, and it was built for a brand. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, because it's important sometimes when your first customer, what are the characteristics of your first customer? Your first customer could be a company that no one knows, or it could be a brand. If your first customers were fortunate was a brand, then when you go to someone else and say, oh, by the way, I've built this for this company, they recognise the company and there's an association there. And that's an important thing in how you build your business when your brand isn't strong, as it won't be. When you first start, your brand isn't strong. And how you actually then grow that over time. The other fortunate thing that I had was the system was built on IBM technology. So hence, I became an IBM business partner in those years. And if you looked at my business card in the early days, the CAS logo was actually smaller than the IBM logo. Well, in fact, it wasn't. It was just a bit of an optical illusion that I had to actually tell IBM at one stage, because the logo police came to me saying it wasn't quite right. But it was interesting because it was a whole association. People in those days sometimes thought I was actually from IBM. So there was a relationship there that they thought I was from IBM. I built a system for ANP. And hence, there was a level of trust that came with buying things from CAS. And that's the next piece, in that if you haven't got a strong brand, then people don't trust you. No matter how good the product is, you don't have that level of trust. And you need to somehow get that. Sure, there are people that will take risk, but that will only get you so far. You ultimately need to get that level of trust. So we grew the business leveraging that, and over time, the CAS brand started to grow. And it started to grow to an extent that we finally removed the IBM logo from our business card and lived on our own logo. We also found, and this is a very important part in the process, and one of the key things is that you may have the best product, but unless you can sell the product, you haven't got a product. Sometimes you don't appreciate what value there is in the sales part of the process. We get approached, and I'll talk a little bit about one of the businesses I run. We get approached for people that want to raise money for their product. And they all show the nice hockey stick of growth, you know, the sales in the early years, and all of a sudden they go up there. So I say, yeah, let me believe that you can make those sales. Tell me where you'll get the salespeople to actually engage. And that's when people start going, sort of, or what do you mean? They'll just happen. They don't happen. And I'll tell you, in the CAS days, in the early days, I was the salesman. I was fortunate that I can actually sell. And I've realised I could sell when I had to present my thesis for the first time, and I wasn't scared getting up and actually talking about it. But in some cases, the inventor, he can't sell. And that's why sometimes the inventor is not the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur usually can sell, and that's one of their gifts. But if you don't have one, then get a partner, a business partner that has those capabilities. It is extremely important. when we try to scale the CAS business, we need to get more salespeople involved. Again, in the early days, our brand wasn't strong. So what type of salespeople do I attract? Well, the people that no one else wants. The one thing I learned, again, another thing that's important, salespeople can do one thing very well. Even if they're bad salespeople, they can sell themselves. They master that, but they don't master much more than that, right? Key thing, I'll give you a little tip. Best way to know whether it's a good salesperson or a bad salesperson, get the resume out. And if you see they've changed jobs, 1 or 2 year cycles, that's when they've been found out. It takes about a year. And if you see a lot of that behaviour, don't go anywhere near them. Don't even bother about interviewing them. Maybe I'm a bit cruel, but that's the way it tends to be. So in the early days, I had salespeople that spent half their time selling for me and half their time putting bets on at the tab, because that was their sort of their part-time job. But what happened as we started to grow, not only could we get the best salespeople, they'd actually want to join us because they want to join the brand. And if you got to think about it, if a sales guy is doing really well where they are, why will they move? They've got to move because they either trust that this is going to give them more, or they're not very good and they need to find a new job. So it's very important, and I can't stress as much as I will, is that level of getting a great sales culture within the organisation as well as innovation culture is important in growing the business. Again, if you look in the Apple days, you've got, there was Jobs and Wozniak. Jobs was more the out there guy, Wozniak was more the backroom guy. There is that combination that in some cases is needed. The other thing is, in one of the other areas that I found is that you need to work on is the people within the organisation. So not only are you looking at yourself, you look at the next level of people that you hire. You've got to make sure you have the right people in those positions, because they will then subsequently do the hiring. And with CAS, when we sold to Telstra, we had 3,000 people. I didn't know 3,000 people. Unfortunately, you get to a point where you don't know everybody. So you have to trust other people in the organisation that will actually hire the right people. And the only way you can do that is the whole pyramid. If you've brought the right people up at the top, as the pyramid grows, they'll hire the right people, and ultimately the organisation will be filled with people that you would also hire if you were actually interviewing them directly.